Welcome to Spiritual Studies Session 48. This session is not made to make a conclusive point. The focus here is on how the English language in particular gives homage to many paganisms, many pantheisms. Many of the common words that are used within the lexicon of the English language are, in fact, rooted in spiritual or mythological or pantheistic histories. This isn't to make a certain claim, although there are some interesting ones to make. Language is a fascinating and endless topic of discussion, and very paradoxical, being that I'm using the language to describe it. Uh, this session is going to be focusing primarily on the Norse mythology and its subsequent English words, focusing on the days of the week and learning the days of the week as it was pertinent to the um, ancient Germanic tribes and the Nordic. And the most of this talk will be a laundry list of Greek deities, words, mythological figures that we now use in common speech all the time. So I'm going to begin by discussing the day of the week in the Norse. And if you're interested in the Greek portion, I'd encourage you to skip forward. So we are going to begin by discussing the very fact of the 7-day week. Why? Why? If you really think about it, why a 7-day week, right? And why are the days of the week in the order that they're in? And it's not to say that there's a good answer to this, because it's actually a very complicated subject. But we see the 7-day week allegedly beginning in Babylon, say around 600 BC. And this was tied to the lunar cycle. Now, it became more of a thing with the rule of institutionalized Christianity, of course, most notably by Emperor Constantine when he converted Rome to Christianity and standardized the 7-day week across the Roman Empire. Now, this is also made into a merriment, a rationalization through Christianity by the canon that God would make the earth and the heavens in the seventh day, thus the mirroring of the 7 days. However, why was this written in scripture to begin with is a whole nother conversation. The significance, the numerological significance of 7 in the collective thoughts of the humanity's past. So as with the Romans, then we have this form: des solis, des lunae, des marten or martis, des mercurii, des aevus, deus veneris, and deus saturni. Other word: Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn. Now, we as English speakers have our original roots in the Germanic, in the Anglo-Saxon, as it's put. So when these conceptions were brought into Western Europe by the Romans in their conquerings, we see that the Germanic, or the root of the language of which we're speaking, did their own thing to mirror this. And it's kind of a chicken or the egg situation, because it was hard for me to find what, if any, conception of the days of the weeks were prior to Roman influence. Um, that's a whole nother discussion, because our focus today is on words. So if we have Sunday, then this would be Sol's Day, Sol. And when the cosmos was created, so was Sol, along with her brother Mani. And if you recall in the course, this is a rather rare arrangement that you see that the sun is the goddess and the moon is a god. Now, the soul was created from sparks gathered from Muspelheim, the land of fire. And from these sparks, both the sun and moon in the beginning. And the actual vessel of the sun itself is not necessarily the deity. The deity rides the vessel, or the vessel is the conduit of the deity. They aren't one and the same. So the sun is the chariot of which Sol rides across the sky. So the idea was both the sun and the moon were racing across the sky in order to continually evade the evil wolf skull who would devour them if they didn't. And this is a nod to the Ragnarok. Because in Ragnarok, that's what happens. This soul, Mani, gets swallowed. And after Ragnarok, the daughter of Sol becomes the new sun, Suna, and outshines her mother. The goddess Sol, however, was not a big focus for the Nordic people and for the Germanic people by extension. She had her place and was a deity of protection and victory. Also a healer, the healing attributes of the sun. So when the word would come down to the Old English, Old Germanic Sunadar, this is the reference to the sun, to Sol. Now, a side note here is the epitomizing of the solar deity is rather rare when it comes to ancient religions. And to note that we're especially not seeing that here. However, when it comes to the Christianization, then Sunday, the day of the sun, turns a much more significant role. Day of rest, day of worship, so forth. Now, I've mentioned Monday a little bit, and so Mani is the name to talk about here, or the Monendag. This is, to the Nords, a god. And this would have been the real marker of the calendar and the days of the week. As mentioned, the ancient conceptions were to measure time by lunar cycles, which makes perfectly clear sense. An interesting superstition found here is that there was a belief that there were 3 Mondays that were unlucky. And if we're using our modern calendar to say when, it would be the first Monday in April, the second Monday in August, and the last Monday in December. To focus on Mani, and by the way, it's Mani, Mani. There is this aspect of the god telling humans time, of telling them dates, of having them prepare rightly for growing seasons. It is a guide to humanity. Mani is a guide and is described as riding the chariot, the heavenly body in the skies, in the heavens. And the changing of the form of the moon, the waxing and waning, was rationalized to be an elusive maneuver of Mani in his riding of the chariot in order to evade Skull. Note here that the sun and moon are not opposites in this conception of the ancient Germanic religions. They are siblings. They are confidants, relates to each other. Now, a twist here on Mani is this association with witchcraft, with the witchy woo, with the ooh, man, what's going on? And subsequently, blessings and curses, that kind of Hecate energy, which is a common trope of the ancient world in ascribing aspects to the moon. That Mani would have a great deal of power in regards to protections of the living and the dead, and would also assist in different clairvoyances, in divinations. Now, to other Germanic people, not the Nords, well, I'm just going to leave that one down. Although Mani is the masculine here, there is still yet the connection to the feminine in noting the primordial goddess session I did on this course. The moon is tied to menstrual cycles, is tied to the ancient woman wisdom of the forgotten world. And so it's a mixed bag when it comes to engendered archetypes here. But suffice it just to say that the moon has everything to do, or at least an influence in the ancient world, on the fertility of crops and the fertility of people's relationships by extension, in love and in marriage. The moon also indicates different holy days, holidays, holy days. And I mean, I think that speaks for itself. And in the ancient world as well, one would be able to discern upcoming weather by observations of the moon. So in both cases, straight away, Sunday and Monday already, you might see what I'm doing here. I'm giving the context to the word of which we modernly speak and have our own associations within our own cultural context. But to dial it back and to say that we're using diluted forms of these ideas to mention our modern time. I hope that makes sense. So let's go on. Tuesday or Thursday. Tyrs is the god of war, defending god, shown with only one hand. The story was that Tyr placed his hands in the jaws of a wolf, Fenrir, as a show of good faith to the other gods while they were attempting to fool the wolf in order to bound him or bind him. And the wolf realized what was going on and subsequently bit off the hand of Tyrs. So this is an illustration of Tyrs loyalty, of his willingness towards self-sacrifice for the betterment of the people, the bravest of the gods. However, Tyr's was later taken over by Odin. Tyr was the son of Odin and can be found in other Germanic tribes as the god of war and battle. However, there's a story to uncover here as to the shifting significance of Tyrs throughout ancient Germanic society, that he may have been a much bigger deal than when we're digging up the story. Again, as mentioned in the Norse mythology talk, what we know of Norse mythology is by virtue of what was written in Iceland way after the fact. So there could be a lot to say, but this word Tyr derived from Tiwaz, and this further goes back into the Proto-Indo-European root through much delineation to Deus. And as we're going to see later, that is also where we get Zeus, or Zeus as we say it now. And this also is the same root that goes to the Dagda of the Celtic, the all-father of the Celtic, the Dagda, and the Latin Diana. So this is to say that, a moment of reflection here, that there is a root to all of these different names, Tyr, Zeus, Dagda, that they all come from one root, all mentioning the same thing differently based off of their own cultural context. Now, what does that say about fights between spiritualities? What does that say about disagreements among cultures? Little miscommunication, maybe not quite knowing the words, huh? So Tirs is this root of divinity by etymology, divinity, just that, divinity. However, as we find Tirs in what we dig up of Nordic pantheism, is a minor deity. So there's an interesting curiosity here. So some mystery about Tuesday. Now, when we're talking about being taken over by Odin, then we're segueing into Wednesday or Woden's Day, or as we say, Odin. But in much earlier times was more commonly referred to as Woden, made to be the equivalent to the Mercury Day. So this is the All-Father, the chief god, the leader of the pantheon. As king, associated with poetry, sorcery, war, death, royalty, knowledge, occult knowledge, and subsequently wisdom. Odin gets a lot of these things by virtue of his adventures, his travels, and his shape-shifting, which is something that doesn't get talked about a lot. So Odin obviously would seem to have displaced Tyr. And while Tyr still had the god of war coin, Odin also had the god of war coin, where the warriors would pay homage to Odin in order to invoke a berserk rage, of which meant they would feel no pain upon the battlefield, or in other words, high tier adrenaline. I don't want to talk much more about Woden's Day, and I'm not going to talk long either about Thor's Day, because I feel like both of these get more than enough attention, Odin and Thor, in the common culture. So Thor, obviously, right? Thunder, lightning, equivalent to Jupiter. Interesting. Take note of that. Depicted holding a giant hammer. Now think about it. The lightning strikes, makes a big sound, a resonant noise. And this would have been, in the ancient world, the striking of the hammer. That's the sound of the hammer striking. However, an interesting thing here is that you can trace Thor back to the Bronze Age, and that this would have most notably been a sky deity, which people don't tend to think of it like that. They tend to think of Thor as just plainly a warrior character. It's a sky deity, defender of society and its ambitions, as it's put. Also has a lot to do with fertility in agriculture, because as a sky god, what makes the land bloom? It's rain, and subsequently storms give a lot of rain. And what does that do? Oh, it makes crops. And the winds, right, also serve a certain function by virtue of the sky god. And very much not mentioned is Thor's wife, Sif, and her golden hair, which resembles grain. And what is Sif? Sif is like the earth goddess. And this is a divine marriage between the sky and the earth. And throughout the whole course, we've seen this so many times. The sexual union between the sky and the earth, creating life. So a very different twist on Thor there. So Thor's day is the sky's day. Huh? Friday is Freya's day. Friday and Freya, the wife of Woden, goddess of love, fertility, and marriage, equivalent to Aphrodite or Venus, depending. The alluring goddess, the sexual goddess, the goddess of femininity. Beauty, although very poignant, was not her character. Her character was a goddess of magic and fate. And like Odin, knew of the fates of the world and all therein. However, unlike Odin, Freya would not try to change it. So that would make her appear to be more wise than Odin. Because in the story of Norse mythology, Odin is very frantic about changing things because he knows how he became king by killing what was before. So he has the guilt and the foresight to know that the same will happen to him as Kronos did when he saw what he did to Uranus and what Zeus would do to him. A mirrorment there. So Freya, to stay on point, is also a host to the dead. While many people tend to point to Valhalla as the thing, Freya would take on the souls of the dead when discussing the Norse afterlife. One of the many things that could be said about the Norse afterlife. So this is a very complex goddess. Not only is she tremendously beautiful and a goddess of love, but is also very wise, very knowing, almost eerie in how much she knows, a quiet wisdom. So a complex deity. So Friday. And to throw it all into the last bag when it comes to talking about the Norse here, Saturday is obviously not, this was a loan. This was taking it straight from Latin. This is not Norse equivalent. This is Saturn's day, straight from the Latin. So this is taken on as a loan. So it doesn't play ball like the rest, which I think is really curious. This is the Sabbath. the old Sabbath, the day of rest. It was Saturday, which is a whole nother discussion, because Saturday is and was the last day of the week. Tricky subjects here, tricky subjects. So in reflection of that, whenever you are booking a appointment, say I'm free next Monday, or I'm free next Tuesday, right? Or whatever. What are we saying? In one way, it seems that we're nodding to the planets. I'll see you on Jupiter's day. Because that's the old way of it. And it's interesting because if you line it up, which objects are brightest in the sky? The sun, the moon, Mars. And then, Jupiter, Mercury. What's the order, right? And you'll see that we no longer mirror this brightness schema, that it's been messed around a bit. And our calendar in the same way has. I mean, if you look at it, December should be the Des month, meaning the 10th month. September also should be the 9th. Or, what am I saying? October should be the 8th. You see, they're named after these things, but these things have been messed around with. You can thank Augustine for that. But this isn't about the calendar. I just want to say, when we are speaking of the days of the week, what are we saying? What are we paying homage to? Or are the words simply what we put into them? This is the philosophical debate. But anyway, let's move on. Let's talk about the Greeks, because we got a lot to talk about when it comes to the Greeks. So all the planets as named by the Greeks that moved to the Latin, right? And then we use some Greek names for other astronomical bodies, and we use some Latin names, when it comes to things of the greater cosmos, right? So like, for instance, the greater cosmos, the Greek, Orion, the Pleiades, Hercules, Hydra, the constellations, right? And then most of the planets, all the planets, right? All the planets after the Roman names. So there's a whole kerfuffle there. But we're just focusing on the common words found, and we're going to start with Andromeda. So Andromeda is the nearest galaxy to us, right? Named after the Greek. So the Greek story, and I'm not going to give stories to each of these because it's a laundry list, as I put before, but the story of Andromeda is that her mom was bragging about how beautiful she was to and these daughters became jealous. And so these daughters and the mom were friends with Poseidon. And what does Poseidon do? Poseidon sends a sea monster to ravage their whole area, which seems like a bit much, but hey, it's drama, people. And so after they figured out what was going on, they chained Andromeda to a rock to be sacrificed to the monster to give mercy to everybody else. Perseus figures out about this. And when the monster comes, he kills it either by slaying it with a knife or exposing Medusa's head to the stone, and turning the monster to stone. This was literalized or taken creative liberties through the movie The Clash of the Titans. That's Andromeda, and this is the old myth. Andromeda saved, Perseus marries her. They have 9 children, which is an astronomical thing. I'm not doing astrotheology right now. And upon their deaths are placed in the sky as constellations. And so you have the constellation of Perseus and Andromeda's mother, Cassiopeia. And Andromeda is the galaxy therein. So to take note here of how much could be investigated astronomically, when it comes to this. Maybe there is an astronomical history to be said of Cassiopeia, Perseus, and the Andromeda galaxy. But it's to say that something that we're observing in the exterior cosmos, right? A word that we give it is going to Greek myth. And by talking about the Greeks, then even mentioning the city of Athens. Well, Athens is an homage to Athena, daughter of Zeus, one of the only daughters that's said to be self-created and motherless, came out adult and fully dressed in her armor. Um, the most brilliant of the children, the most ferocious and implacable in battle, in fighting, would defend the state and would defend the wills of the people against enemies of the outside. This is a, what's the word? Tutelary god, spirit, a locale god, a god that rules over a place, as we saw in ancient paganisms and shamanisms, the goddess of the city, the protector of civilized life, and extension to all things such as agriculture. So when you say, I'm visiting Athens, this is a nod. It's Athena. Mentioning gods, if I were to say the word hermaphrodite, this is Hermes Aphrodite. Hermaphroditos, a person with the attributes of both sexes. The son of Hermes and Aphrodite, which son is a big word here, but she prayed for the complete union. Lovers prayed for a complete union with each other, and their bodies were united, combining male and female aspects, hermaphroditic. So when you are saying hermaphrodite, what are you saying? Mentioning Aphrodite, aphrodisiacs, things that excite sexual desire. It could be a drug or it could be scents. That which is sacred to Aphrodite. Aphrodite is love and sexual pleasure. Anything that is love and sexual pleasure is archetypally and personified through the form of Aphrodite. Thus, aphrodisiacs, things that are of the spirit of Aphrodite. Mm, 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 mm. And to talk about Hermes, if you have a jar that is hermetically sealed, this is a nod to Hermes. If you study Hermeticism, this is Hermes, God, the messenger of the gods, or Hermes Trismegistus, which if you want to look into that, there's a whole session on that. Now, mentioning earlier Deus, or the root of these different all-fathers, in Greek, Zeus, right? Zeus. But by extension, Deus, as it would come into Latin, or when we say things like, you know, in Spanish, Dios mío, right? When you say Dios, what is that really going back to? If it's the same root as Zeus, as Zeus, when we say like Deus ex machina, uh, you know, is this God? Or, you know, I hope you guys can see what I'm trying to say here. The slipperiness of these linguistics. So something that I mentioned in the course before, I had a whole session on it, was the ether. What I didn't mention is in our word ether, you know, ethernet, etheric, ethereal. There is a god, Aether, in Greek. And I think this is more of an Orphism thing than a classic Greek mythology thing. But ether, or Aether, Aether, was one of the original things, and come to, or the protogenoi, or genoi. was later replaced by the pantheon that we know much better. But of course, ether was turned into all manner of either scientific phenomena, such as the forces of gravity and light, or alchemically in ancient sciences was the fifth element, the quintessence, the prima materia, whatever. That's a whole session of itself. The air of the heavens could also have been interpreted as the atmosphere, which is another Greek word. But this god was birthed, first comes chaos, then the darkness, then the night, Erebus and Nyx. And the child of these two um, emergences is the ether, the heavenly air, the upper air, the air of the gods, the air that the gods breathe, whatever this abstract thing is. So when mentioning the ethernet, when mentioning something ethereal, this is a nod to the primordial deity of the first creation story, in the early creation story of like Orphism. And by extension, Aeon. If you were to ever use the word Aeon or see it written as a measurement of time, or a large expanse of time, this is another nod to a god. Aion, Aeon, depicted as either completely naked or almost naked within the circle of the zodiac, and this representation of snakes coiling around him. Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. Time is a cycle, a cyclical time, that time goes in on itself. Or the snakes coiling is a reminiscent of DNA and sacred things such as. Oh, but also this aspect of time, how Aeon would be very old and would shed the skin like a snake and then would be very young. This creature of eternal time. The twinning serpents in a hoop. There's so much good symbolism there. That the cosmos and the outer circle, the thing that encapsulates all things, the very edge of the universe itself, likewise, is this Ouroboros, this snake eating its own tail, or the edge of the Aeon. And Aeon would be one of the mainstays or sharp notes of the mystery schools of ancient Greek tradition, the mystery schools of Mithras, Orpheus, Cybele, Dionysus. Gosh, man, I'm fettering on my words right now. There is a distinction I want to note here between Aeon and Kronos, right? Because Kronos is father time. Aeon is distinguished as unbounded time, whereas Kronos is time in the version of past, present, future, or bounded time, or ordered time. And notice how you experience both these ways of time in your life. If you experience unbounded time, you are in it. You are not thinking of laters and befores. You are purely within the sensation, within the aeon. Whereas if you are doing the mundane thing, say scheduling out the days of the week, that is Kronos. So let's talk about Kronos. The word chronic, I've got a chronic pain. Chronic, oh, that's Kronos. Oh, let's have it in chronological order. Oh, chronological. Oh, Kronos. Okay. Who is Kronos? Oh, Kronos is one of the Titans. Titans. Oh, you mean like the word Titanic? Oh, so when I say Titanic, I'm mentioning the Greek Titans. Or maybe another word, maybe gigantic. Oh, gigantic. You mean like the gigantus. Oh, the gigantus of the Greek mythos, subsequently becoming the word giants. The giants, or the gigantus, coming from the word gigas, like a gigabyte, a very big byte. The gigantes were not actually big in the ancient myth, but they were in a battle with the Olympian gods, and they would get confused with the Titans. And so that's why people think they're big. So really, giants and the term giants in its deviation is actually, its definition is based on a misunderstanding in time. Oh gosh. They were born from the blood of the castration of Uranus meeting Gaia. And they would fight, they would fight the gods, and they would be overtaken and buried in volcanoes, and are thought to be the cause of volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. Now, that's a whole subject I would like to get to in the course at some point. The many myths surrounding giants. There's a lot more to talk about there, especially in regards to the Book of Enoch, the Nephilim, and the many stories of the Native Americans. But anyhow, let's dial it back. Before I mentioned chaos, and it's obvious we use this word in the rudimentary in the same form as it was back then, chaos. But in this conception, chaos is the prima materia. Chaos is the original fabric of the universe. I don't know what modern physicists would call this. Maybe I remember one reference was the substance Hyperion, or was it Hyperion? No, it was Aperion, which is also another Greek philosophical term. But anyway, now chaos is simply used to describe disorder, something that's out of control, whereas in the older sense, this would be immeasurable space, a gaping void, synonymous to the Nordic conception of the Guna gap. Again, what was there at the beginning, the gap, the immeasurable void, the chasm. And this was the original chaos, which does birth things. The chaos does birth things. So in a way, it does have deification. It birthed and was the begetter of, as I mentioned, Erebus, darkness, and Nyx, the night. Now, what comes of chaos? What comes of chaos? Chaos turns to cosmos. From chaos comes order. So there's a lot more headiness and even spiritual sophistication to the origination of this term, as opposed to what we now would consider simply confusion. And then now has a term as a theory in chaos theory, which is another subject to get to in time. But let's move on. I mentioned Eros before in the course. Well, Eros, the god of love and of uncertain origins, depending on which story you're reading. The word erotic, the word erotica, homoerotica, whatever erotica you care. All is about Eros. To mention any of these things is a nod to Eros. When mentioning Gaia, this is the old model, the tectonic delineation of the world of Pangaea. Pangaea is a direct verbal nod to Gaia. Pangaea, all of Gaia in the same place, all of the land. Laundry list goes on. Hypnos, I mentioned before in the course, god of sleep. Hypnotic, hypnosis. What does hypnosis do? Oh, it puts you to sleep, or a nearness to sleep, right? Hypnos lived in a cave with his twin brother, Thanatos, death. Sleep and death live in the cave together, where there's no light from the moon or sun. And the cave is full of poppies, like opium, and all manner of sleep-inducing plant like valerian. And what runs through the cave? Oh, the river Alethe, the river of forgetfulness flows through the cave. Again, some Plato's cave vibes here, maybe, you know, those who live in the cave of sleep and death. And in relation to hypnos is phantastos, the archetype of fantastic dreams. In the word fantastic, if you say fantastic, it's all about phantastos. And Morpheus, the god of dreams, morphology, amorphous, metamorphosis, morphing, shapelessness, but form, shape and form, dreams, Morpheus, and of course, ripped off by the Matrix. Not ripped off, but moving on. Nemesis, the word nemesis directly coming from Greek myth, Nemesis, the goddess of divine retribution. That if someone was arrogant, Nemesis would bring karma. And a story of Nemesis is how she punished Narcissus. Narcissus did wrong by many different ladies, was disdainful of all those that loved him. So Nemesis came with the retribution and led him to a pool where he saw his reflection and fell in love with it. And he was so in love that he could never leave his own reflection, and he died there. Now, who is this Narcissus? Well, the word narcissist. Moving on. Oceanus, or the ocean, the primordial god birthed by Chaos and Gaia, one of the 12 Titans. Oceanus married his sister Tethys, which they had numerous children called the Oceans, or the Oceanids. They were streams, rivers, and seas, and springs. So springs, rivers, lakes, all these things have a originator, which is the ocean. The ocean is the father or mother or both of all smaller bodies of water. And though Oceanus is a Titan, he did not participate in the fight against the Olympian gods, and so was left alone. Now, Tethys and Oceanus did get a divorce because they were so fertile that they would produce many children, which would produce floods. So their love would bring disorder to the world. Now that's some poetry right there. If you think about if you've ever had a relationship like that. Their love was so great that it was for the better that it was not. That's tragic. Classic Greek. All right. Oceanus was depicted with bull horns and a serpentine tail like a fish instead of legs. Now, the bull horns, could be some symbolism there. Maybe this directedness, or maybe the power, right? The power, the horns, you know, the power of the ocean, its ability you don't want to underestimate it. Now, these ones are a little, this is a little dicey, but Helios. Helios is the sun, right? So I don't really see this much aside from the term heliocentric. The heliocentric model as proposed, right? But one that's much more on the nose is when we mention the god Atlas, because we have the Atlas, like, the book, the Atlas, which is strange, right? That it's literally named after this ancient Greek deity, and is a Titan. and did participate in the battle against the Olympian gods. And the punishment was to uphold the pillars of the heaven or the earth, depending on the reference. And there's a belief that Atlas, the name, was originally a mountain god. One of these mountains in Western Africa. The name Atlas itself is etymologically meaning the bearer of the heavens. So that's an interesting one, it goes deeper in language past the Greeks, but hey, the Greeks got their language from somewhere, huh? So there is this goddess of memory, Mnemosyne. Mnemosyne. Okay, so what could that mean? Okay, mnemonic devices. What do mnemonic devices do? They help you remember things. So yeah. And phosphorus, the substance, phosphorescence, whatever form, is a nod to the god that is the morning star and the planet Venus in its appearance in the morning star, which we talked about this before in the course too. Phosphorus as a substance and as an attribute of description is a nod to the morning star, strangely enough. And to extend out to space again, you have Astreus, you have Asteria, you have Astreos, astronauts, asteroids, all these things rooted in these different goddesses. I believe each of these are goddesses that are pointing to the stars. And Selene, the moon, you get this in a few different terms, mostly scientific, but there's selenophilia, the love of the moon. The river Styx is caught in the word Stygian, Stygian, a nod to the river Styx. The word typhoon in the ocean, right? The typhoon, and the disease or the ailment of typhus is a nod back to the monstrous Typhon. You even have the root of the term angel in the Greek mythos in Angelia and Angelos, angel, angelic. So the Christians nod to the ancient Greek mythos here. A rare story of the birth of Hecate mentions Angelos, which is this kind of equivalent to Hecate that perhaps Angelos was the tie to the upper world, whereas Hecate was of the underworld. In another way, you have Angelia, the other mention that I had, which was the daughter of Hermes and was literally the messenger of the gods. So what do angels do? Oh, they bring messages from God, like Angelia? This gets deep, man. She was the daemon of tidings and proclamations. And daemon is another really fascinating etymology, but it's Daemon, which would be appropriated, contorted, and put with its own definitions by the modern term demon. Anyway, oh gosh. Mania is a deity. Mania is used across the board in psychological terms. For instance, pyromania. Mania was associated with the crazed, the mentally ill, and the dead. That if she were to touch you, that you would go into a fit of irrational rage or whatever. That if animals would become crazed or foaming from the mouth, the reason was mania, this deity that was born of the darkness, Nyx and Erebus. Not really good parents there, right? And upon her touch, anything would lose its mind. So an interesting nod there too, right? These people afflicted with mania. And similarly, when talking about psychology, Phobos Phobia, the laundry list of different phobias as classified within the nomenclature of psychology. The most common one that people know is claustrophobia and arachnophobia. Phobos is the god of fear, son of Ares and Aphrodite, brother of Desmos, terror, which is a moon of Mars, by the way, and Harmonia. That those who would follow a cult to Phobos would make some really visceral, bloody, violent sacrifices to appease the god of fear. Now, just imagine that, Moving on. I mentioned harmonia. Okay. Well, harmony, harmonious. Okay. Moving on. One of the fates, there are three fates that spin the threads of time. One of them is named Atropos, and this leads to the term atrophy, to dwindle away. Atropos was the one that would cut the string that would end the life of somebody. To talk about psychology a little bit more, the very term psychology is psyche. Psyche is mortal. And you could say all of these attributes that I'm talking about right now, all of these archetypes of life, Zeus, harmony, fear, any of these things are all in the mind. They're all in the mortal character of psyche. Psyche is, even, I just want to make the point, even the term psychology in its very name itself is nodding to pantheism. Moving on, there is the aure and the aura. And we say aura. This person has a wide aura, or, whatever, the green aura, or, all these different talks. They have a weird aura about them. Well, the aurae were nymphs, and these nymphs were spirits of the wind. Aura was this specific personification of gentle breezes, cool, refreshing early morning breezes. And aura was another part of the Eleusinian mysteries, one of the many things within the mystery cult. So this personification of a breeze, I want to point out here, the reason why we're finding so many things in the ancient Greek mythos is because the amount of things that we call religion or spirituality, right? There are people, and this doesn't just apply to the Greeks. There are people that notice that there's a cool wind that doesn't feel like any others. And I have only felt that wind so many times in my life, right? Or the feeling of fear, right? That's a thing. That's a thing that we experience. Or a mountain. That mountain has its own vibe about it. It has its own spirit about it, right? Like the sensation of love, Aphrodite, right? The sensation of love. They're just naming things that humanity experiences within the mind, within the beingness. And we call this religion. I'm moving on. Boreas, the god of the northern wind, is found in the term aurora borealis or hyperborean. So the aurora borealis would be literally saying aura boreas. which is kind of a weird contradiction. But Boreas, this northern wind, would have this beard that was speckled with ice, and was this hardy northerner, because the north wind moves towards the cold. And the term Borea or Boreo back in etymology means to devour, the cold that which devours, which in one of our other sessions we saw that the chimera was a representation of the winter's violence. Similarly, we have Zephyrus, which we have in the English term zephyr. Zephyrus was the west wind, another wind god, and was the god of spring, and had a wife. Her name was Chloris. Chloris was the goddess of greenery. Okay, Chloris, greenery. Chloroplasts, like in plants, or chloroform. Huh? Electra, tied to the word electricity. Now that one's a little bit of a stretch. However, Hygeia, goddess of health, or daughter or sister or whatever to Asclepius, was subsequently what makes the word hygiene. Hygiene is health, healing in regards to health. Good hygiene, it helps with good health. Hygeia, a reference to, again, an ancient Greek deity related to the aforementioned Hypnos and Phantastos and Morpheus, is Pasithea, goddess of rest and relaxation. Pasithea is the root of the term pacifism, or even the Pacific Ocean. So who's a pacifist? A pacifist is someone who's relaxed. The only reason you'd ever turn violent is if you are not chill. And, you know, I might say that I'm rather amused. I might say, oh, I'm just musing, or I might, you know, like some music to be played. Well, what is that? That is a nod to the muses. And a common saying still to this day is Achilles' heel, Midas touch. And in regards to brands, Pandora or Nike or Mercury, literally the cars. So let's summarize. I feel like I've been all over the board here. I'm not trying to say anything too concrete right now, okay? Because on one hand, we could make this bigger, and on one hand, we can make this smaller. The smaller thing is to say that words are what we bring meaning to them, and that's it. It's what we believe they mean. That's it. Full stop. No significance of this talk. I've contributed nothing to a spiritual conversation, and I've just done a giant linguistic session. Okay, sure. On the other hand, let's make this the bigger interpretation. The bigger interpretation, as I've been hammering in the whole time. We cannot escape in our very verbiage nods to ancient spiritualities, ancient myths. Even if I were to say the word ocean, this is a weird hint. You know, any of these words that I've mentioned are a hint. And by no means have I been exhaustive in the amount of words that do this. Not even just with the Greeks, the Greek list can go on, but to extend that out to the Latin, to extend that out more to the Norse, to extend it out to all other cultures in loan terms, because English is an amalgamation of Frankenstein's monster of different languages. So another point of this is the question of language, you know, and the question of meaning of words. So every language is a collection of dead languages. That's the nature of how the web or the tree pans out in time, like a river. But on the other hand, the amount of depth in each word that we speak and the amount of nods that come along with each little mark that you make in a sentence can hint back to things well beyond us. And this is the ramification of the word. Now, here's where I can tie it in, right? Because as mentioned before in the course, in the beginning, there was the word, which I equated to the logos. Now, if this is a similar structure, the word is the original stream of which panned out and fractaled into all the other expressions that we speak and that nature speaks. So there's your spiritual element. I mean, I could do a whole nother session on just focusing on that spiritual tradition of the word or that specific nuance. But it's all to say too that in this giant linguistic discussion, that it's all connected. And I really feel like that goes home when I was mentioning Odin, the Dagda, Zeus, and Deus, how they're all coming from the same root, right? So in this way, let's make an analogy. All these different spiritual traditions are related to each other. They all fractal or intertwine into each other in different ways. And throughout this whole course, that's what you've been seeing me do, is you've been seeing me tie these things together to make bridges and analogies and to connect the streams between what seem like clashing ideologies, whereas it's all just variations of the same things, and that miscommunications and misinterpretations from one to the other. Oh, okay. I feel like I've bitten off more than I can chew.